The call came in at 8:47 on a Tuesday in October, and I remember thinking, as I keyed the mic, that it would be a short night. Dispatch was Yolanda Beaver that shift, and she doesn't rattle. 15 years on the console, and she's talked people through births and overdoses, and a man with a knife in his own chest, without her voice moving off the flat, calm line she keeps it on. So when she came over the channel with something tight in her throat, I set my coffee down and started the truck before she finished the sentence. Unit 4, I've got a hunter, cellular, real upset. Says there's a person standing on a ridge out past the cut bank drainage, alone. No light, no gear he can see, just standing. Copy. He hurt? He's fine. He's scared. A pause, the kind she takes when she's reading her own notes, back to herself. He says the person's been standing there since before the sun went down and hasn't moved. Not once. He glassed it for 20 minutes with a spotting scope. It's dark now, and he says he can still see it. I pulled out of the lot behind the tribal building and turned east, toward the mountains, where the last orange was already gone off the peaks, and the sky had gone that deep bruise color it gets before real dark in the fall. You have coordinates? He's given me a spot off his hunting app. I'll relay. Ben. She only uses my first name when she wants me to actually hear her. He says the ridge is the one the old-timers call the Eastern Ridge, above the Two Medicine survey line. I knew the place. Every officer on our department knows it. The way you know a house on your route where a dog once bit a mail carrier, a low background fact you carry without examining. It sits right up against the wilderness boundary, on land that is ours on the map, and nobody's in practice, too steep to graze, too far to hunt easy, no road in closer than 4 miles of washed-out fire track. In 15 years I'd been up that way maybe twice, both times for nothing. Copy the location, I said. I'm 40 minutes out on the fire road at best. Get me the ranger station at St. Mary on the phone patch. If there's a person exposed up there overnight, this becomes SAR fast, and I want Federal on the horn before I lose signal in the canyon. That was procedure. Cut bank drainage sits inside a jurisdictional seam, tribal land on one side, the national park's backcountry on the other, and the ridge itself straddles it, depending on which survey you trust. Standard practice on a possible exposure case near the boundary is early notification to Park Service so their search and rescue can spin up in parallel. We've run dozens of joint operations. I've eaten sandwiches out of the back of ranger trucks at 2 in the morning. It's routine. It's the most routine thing in the world. Yolanda patched me through. I heard the double click, and then the calm recorded line greeting of the St. Mary dispatch, and a ranger picked up. A man, younger by his voice. St. Mary, go ahead. This is Officer Ben Running Crane, Tribal Police, Badge 411. I've got a possible exposed subject, single individual, stationary, reported on a ridge near the wilderness boundary, requesting you spin up SAR on your side in case this crosses. Subjects on the Eastern Ridge, above the old Two Medicine survey line, north of the cut bank. I heard him stop breathing. That's the only way I can describe it. Mid-sentence, the small sounds a person makes on an open line, the shift of a chair, the intake before a word. All of it stopped. The line stayed open. I could hear the room behind him, a printer somewhere, the hum of a heater. But the man went completely still, the way you go still when something walks past the tent. "Ranger, you copy?" I said the eastern ridge, above. "Don't call us about that ridge again." Quiet, not angry, almost gentle, the way you'd say a hard thing to someone you didn't want to hurt. Then the line went dead, not hung up hard, just gone, the patch collapsing into the hiss of the canyon. I sat with the truck idling on the shoulder of the fire road for a second. Then I told myself it was a bad connection, a Green Ranger, a misheard call. I told Yolanda to try Many Glacier Station instead, the next district over. She patched it. Older woman answered this time, and I gave her the same information, slower, badge number first, jurisdiction, the works. I got exactly as far as Eastern Ridge, before the same silence dropped into the line like a stone into a well. 3-4 seconds. I counted them. "Officer," she said, "I'm sorry. Please don't call about that one." And the line died. I sat there in the dark, with the heater ticking and the last of the light gone off the mountains. And for the first time in a long career, I felt the specific cold that comes when a routine thing refuses to be routine. I tried Cutbank Interagency after that, the Fed dispatch that handles overflow. Same thing. The dispatcher there didn't even let me finish the ridge's name. She just said, very fast, like a woman pulling her hand back from a stove, "That's not ours, that's yours, don't call here," and hung up. 3 stations, 3 different people, not one of them confused, not one of them asking me what I was talking about. Every one of them knew exactly which ridge, and every one of them had a sentence already loaded and ready before I finished speaking. I got up there that night. It took me an hour and 10 minutes because the fire road had slid in 2 places, and I had to walk the last 1.5 miles with a headlamp and a shotgun I did not remember drawing. I found nothing on the ridge. No person, no prints in the frost that was already forming on the north-facing dirt, no gear, no drag marks, no blood. I stood on the spine of it in the cold with my breath going up white, and I glassed the whole slope. And there was nothing there but rock and stunted pine and the enormous black shape of the wilderness falling away to the west. Ridge after ridge after ridge, with not one light in all of it. The hunter, when I called him back, was defensive in the way scared people get. His name was Delmar Wells, 61, out of Browning, a man I'd known distantly for years. He swore up and down the figure had been there. He'd photographed it through his phone against the scope. He sent me the picture. It was a smear of gray on gray, the resolution garbage, and it could have been a person or a snag or nothing at all. But he said one thing on that call that I wrote down word for word, because it snagged on something in me and wouldn't come loose. He said, "It wasn't that it was standing there that got me, Ben. It's that it was standing there like it was waiting for me to leave so it could get on with something." I filed my report that night. Case 24-1147. Possible exposed subject. Area searched. No subject located, no evidence of foul play. Under the notification field, where I list which agencies I contacted, I wrote what happened. Park Service contacted 3 stations. All declined to respond. No reason given. I read it back, and it looked insane sitting there in the calm gray box of the report form. So I softened it. I wrote, Park Service, SAR, unavailable. That's the phrase we use when their people are already committed to another call. It was a lie, and I knew it was a lie when I typed it, and I have thought about that small lie a great many times since, because I understand now that I was already doing the thing they do. I was already writing the Ridge quiet. I should have let it go, a stationary figure that vanishes, a bad phone patch, 3 rangers having a bad night. That's the whole case, if you want it to be. But the thing about being good at this work for a long time is that you develop a sense for the shape of an ordinary problem, the way a carpenter feels a stud through drywall. And this had the wrong shape. Ordinary things don't come preloaded into 3 separate mouths across 3 separate agencies. Somebody had told those people what to say. Somebody had done it long enough ago that the saying of it had gone smooth and worn, like a stone in a river. Rangers don't refuse a possible fatality. Not ever. It goes against everything the job is built on. A ranger will hike into a whiteout for a lost dog, and these 3 had, without hesitation, without conscience, refused to even hear the name of a place. The next morning I did the first thing you do when a case has the wrong shape. I pulled the old files. Our records room is a converted storage closet on the back of the tribal building, and until about 6 years ago, everything in it was paper. There's a woman named Corinne who runs it, retired from the BIA, and she can find anything in that room in about 90 seconds if she likes you, and about a week if she doesn't. She likes me. I told her I wanted anything we had, going back as far as it went, that referenced the Eastern Ridge, the cut-bank drainage above the survey line, or that stretch of the wilderness boundary. I told her I was doing background on a search area. She looked at me for a second too long. Corinne is 70-some years old and has been in and around this department since before I was born. "The one above 2 Medicine," she said, not a question. "That's the one." She didn't say anything else. She just went to a specific run of shelving in the back, the old stuff, the boxes with the water stains, and she started pulling folders, and she pulled a lot more than I expected. She stacked them on the little table by the copier without a word, and then she went back to her desk and put her reading glasses on and looked at her screen and did not offer to help me any further, which was not like her at all. I spent the whole day in that room. The oldest report was from 1961, handwritten in the cramped pencil hand of an officer named Joseph Guardipi, a name I knew only from a photograph in the hallway of men long dead. The report described a rancher's complaint of a light on the eastern ridge at night. Steady. Does not flicker like fire. Present 4 nights running. Officer Guardipi had hiked up. He'd found nothing. And at the bottom, in the notification field, he had written in that same tight pencil, "Attempted to notify Park Service, a possible fire, Kennedy Creek Station. Ranger advised this ridge is a tribal matter, and rang off. Odd. Odd. 63 years ago, a man wrote the same word I'd nearly written the night before. I kept going. There was a report from 1974, a missing hunter, and the officer, a man named Vernon Old Person, had written 3 pages, and on the second page he had written, "Called Park Dispatch for aircraft. They will not overfly the eastern ridge." Ranger stated, quote, "That's understood to be yours," unquote. Asked what that meant. No answer given. Line disconnected, and then underlined twice, in a different pen like he'd come back to it later. Third time this has happened to me, on this ridge. Nobody will tell me why. 1982. A woman reported her husband had walked up toward the ridge to hunt, and returned wrong. Her word, quiet and cold and unable to say where he'd been for the 2 days he was gone. Officer's note. Subject located, physically unharmed, disoriented, declines to discuss. Park SAR not contacted per standing practice. Per standing practice. That phrase stopped me cold. By 1982 it had a name. It had become a practice, the way we do things, written down as calmly as you'd write per department policy. I started keeping a list. By the time Corinne flicked the overhead lights to tell me she was closing the room, I had 31 reports spanning 63 years, and I had a pattern so clean it made the back of my neck cold. Every few years, an incident on or near the eastern ridge. Different callers, different seasons, different officers, no 2 situations alike. A light, a missing hunter, a figure, a woman who heard voices in the wind that said her sister's name, her sister 10 years dead. A man who walked up and came back, not knowing his own truck. And in 30 of the 31 reports, at some point, the officer had tried to bring in the Park Service, and the Park Service had refused, and the officer had recorded that refusal in language that got, decade by decade, more and more careful. The early ones said odd. The later ones said per standing practice. Somewhere in the 70s, the department had stopped being surprised and started being quiet, and the quiet had a procedure, and the procedure had no explanation attached to it anywhere in 63 years of paper. I photographed every report before I left. Old habit. You never trust that a file will still be there tomorrow. That turned out to be the smartest thing I did in the whole business, because when I came back 3 days later to pull the 1982 disorientation report and follow up on the husband, the file was gone, not misfiled. Corinne and I went through that entire run of shelving twice. The folder for that case number was there. It was empty. The report inside it, the one I had read and photographed with my own phone, was simply not there anymore, and Corinne stood looking into that empty folder for a long time, and then she closed it and put it back, and said very quietly, "You have your pictures." "I have my pictures." "Then don't come asking me for the paper again," she said, "because the paper's going to keep doing that." It always did, and she went back to her desk. I understood 2 things in that moment. The first was that Corinne had watched this happen before, more than once over a very long career, and had made her own private peace with it, the peace of a person who has decided that some doors you note the location of and do not open. The second was that I was not going to make that peace. I have never been able to. It is the flaw in me that has made me good at this job and bad at sleeping. So I went to the Rangers directly, not by radio, in person, in daylight, on the record, the way you make a thing impossible to simply hang up on. I drove to the St. Mary station on a bright, cold morning, and I asked for the district ranger, a man named Kurt Halverson. I'd worked 2 avalanche recoveries with. A good man, competent, the kind who buys the coffee. I sat down across his desk, and I put my hat on my knee, and I said, "Kurt, I need to talk to you about the Eastern Ridge." I watched it happen to a man I knew. His face didn't change much. That was the terrible part. He didn't go pale or look away. He just went still, the same stillness I'd heard on the phone, a man setting down whatever he'd been holding and folding his hands. And he said, "Ben, we've known each other a long time." "We have." "Then I'm going to ask you, as a friend, to let this one lie. A man may have died up there, Kurt, or worse. 60 years of men and women may have. I've got the reports. Your agency won't overfly it, won't respond to it, won't say the name of it. I need to know why." He was quiet for a while. Outside the window, a raven was working at something in the parking lot. Then he said the most honest thing anyone said to me in the entire investigation, and it was worse than any lie. "I don't know why," he said. "That's the truth of it, and I'll say it once, and then I'll ask you to go. When I came on this district 19 years ago, my predecessor sat me down in this chair, and he told me there was a place near the tribal line, and that if the tribal police ever called about it, I was to acknowledge that I understood, and then end the contact, and make no report. He said it wasn't ours anymore. It was theirs, and that the arrangement was older than him, and older than his predecessor. I asked him why. He said he'd asked too, and the answer he got was that asking was the one part of the job that had ever gotten anybody hurt. So I stopped asking, and I've done it maybe 6 times in 19 years, and every one of those times I've felt like a coward, and every one of those times I've done it anyway, because the one man I ever knew who kept asking is not a story I want to tell you before lunch. Tell me his name." "No," Kurt said. "Go home, Ben." I did not go home, but I want to be fair to him, and to all of them, because I understand now that they weren't cowards, and they weren't in on some scheme. They were doing exactly what I did on the very first night when I typed SAR unavailable instead of the truth. They were carrying a thing forward that had been handed to them, worn smooth, with the reasons long since rubbed off. The horror of it, the real horror I came to understand slowly over the following year, is not that somebody was hiding something. It's that nobody was. The secret had outlived everyone who ever knew it. All that was left was the habit of keeping it. The next thread I pulled was the arrangement itself. Kurt had said, arrangement. Vernon Old Person, back in 74, had written that's understood to be yours. That kind of language, understood to be arrangement, standing practice, comes from paper. Somewhere there had been a document. Interagency cooperation between a tribe and the Park Service and the county doesn't happen on a handshake. It lives in memoranda of understanding, jurisdictional agreements, the dense, unglamorous paperwork that decides who answers a call and who signs the overtime. I have read hundreds of these in my career. If there was an arrangement about the Eastern Ridge, it had a document, and a document leaves a trail even after somebody burns it, because copies get filed in places nobody remembers to clean. I started with the county. The Glacier County Sheriff's records go back further than ours in some categories because they've never had a fire or a flood in their basement archive. I spent 2 weekends down there, off the clock, on my own dime, going through boxes of interagency correspondence with a young deputy named Priscilla Fox, who thought I was researching an old boundary dispute and was happy for the company, and in a box labeled Jurisdiction MISC pre-1970, under a stack of forgotten fence line disputes, I found the first real piece. It was a single carbon copy of a letter dated March of 1958 on Park Service letterhead from a superintendent whose name meant nothing to me, addressed to the tribal council and copied to the sheriff. It was a short letter, and most of it was the ordinary throat-clearing of government correspondence. But the operative paragraph, the one I have since read so many times I could recite it in my sleep, said this: pursuant to the incidents of the past 18 months on the Eastern Ridge above the Two Medicine survey line, and in the interest of the safety of all personnel, this office proposes the following standing arrangement, to which the undersigned parties have verbally agreed. That primary and sole authority for all reports, incidents, and inquiries arising from the said ridge shall rest with the tribal police, that no Park Service personnel shall respond to, overfly, document, or otherwise involve themselves in such incidents subsequent to first contact by tribal authorities, and that this arrangement shall be self-perpetuating and shall not be subject to review, in accordance with the recommendation of the parties present at the January meeting. The incidents of the past 18 months, in the interest of the safety of all personnel, the recommendation of the parties present at the January meeting. Not one word about what the incidents were. Not one word about what had happened at the January meeting to make 3 separate agencies agree that the safest possible course was to never look at a place again. And that phrase, self-perpetuating and shall not be subject to review. I have written a lot of policy in my life, and I have never seen those words. You don't write that a rule can never be reviewed unless you are afraid of what a review would find, or unless somebody who is gone now was afraid and made you promise, and the promise was easier to keep than to understand. I photographed the letter. I did not take the original, and when I went back to that box 2 weeks later to show it to Priscilla, the letter was gone, and Priscilla looked at the empty spot in the file and then looked at me with a fear in her face I had put there, and I understood that the ridge's habit of erasing its own paper was not confined to our little closet on the reservation. It reached into a county basement 40 miles away. It reached apparently wherever it needed to. But I had my picture. I always have my pictures. The January meeting became the thing I chased next, because everything hung off it. Something happened in the 18 months before March of 1958 that scared 3 agencies into a permanent silence. And there had been a meeting in January of '58 where they'd agreed to it. If I could find what the incidents were, I would have the center of the whole thing. I went back to Corinne one more time, and I didn't ask her for paper. I asked her for a person. I asked her who was working these incidents in 1956 and 1957, who would have been the tribal officer on the Eastern Ridge before Joseph Guardapi's 1961 report. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That would have been my uncle, Wilson Bull Shoe. He was chief of police here from 54 to 58. She took her glasses off. He resigned in the spring of 58, Ben, and he never said why, and he was not a man who quit things. He lived to be 91, and he never spoke about the job, not once, not to anybody. And there's one more thing I'll tell you, because I think you've already earned the trouble it's going to cause you." She stood up, and she straightened her cardigan the way she does when she's decided something. He kept journals his whole life, little field notebooks. My cousin has them in a trunk in Hart Butte, and there's a stretch of them, the winter of 57 into 58, where the handwriting goes strange. And then there's about 2 months, just torn out. I read them when he passed. I always wondered what was in those pages. I stopped wondering on purpose. She wrote an address on a card. "Bring my cousin something. She likes those cinnamon rolls from the gas station in Browning." The journals of Wilson Bull Shoe are the most valuable documents I have ever handled, and I handled them at a kitchen table in Hart Butte, with a plate of gas station cinnamon rolls between me and a wary woman named Agnes, who watched me the whole time like I might steal the silverware. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect: weather, mileage, arrests, the small, careful accounting of a man who took his duty seriously. But the winter of 57 was different, and Corinne was right. The hand changed. It got smaller, and it pressed harder into the paper. There were 3 entries before the torn-out section, and I copied them down exactly, and they are the closest thing to an explanation that exists in the world, and they explain nothing. The first, dated November 1957, "Third family this fall to lose someone to the ridge. Not lost in the ordinary way. They walk up, and they come back with the wrong insides. Or they walk up, and they don't come back. And then a stranger comes down who has their face and doesn't know our names. Elders say the ridge has always taken a little. They say it used to take less. Something changed. Something up there is hungrier than it was." The second, December 1957, met with the park super and the sheriff. Showed them the tally. 22 in 3 years, and that's just who we know. The super went white. He asked what I proposed. I said I proposed we seal it, road and trail, and let no living soul up there. And the sheriff said, "You can't seal a mountain." And he's right. You can't. The elders say you can't fight it, and you can't feed it. All you can do is not draw its attention. And the way you don't draw its attention is you stop looking at it. You stop counting. A thing that's watched grows toward the watcher. So we don't watch. Nobody official ever looks at that ridge again. That's the arrangement. God forgive us. And the third entry, the last before the missing pages, dated the second week of January 1958, in a hand so cramped it was nearly illegible. They agreed. Meeting adjourned. We wrote it so it can never be reviewed, because if a young man ever reviews it, he will want to prove it wrong, and to prove it wrong, he will have to look, and to look is the whole danger. I am putting into these pages what happened to me on the ridge on the night of the 6th, so that one record survives, because a thing with no record can grow without limit. And then the pages were torn out, not cut, torn in a hurry, the ragged edges still in the binding, by a man who I believe wrote down the one true account of what lives on the eastern ridge, and then, in the days that followed, was frightened enough by his own record to destroy it, because the elders had told him a thing that watches grows toward the watcher, and he had realized that even a written account is a kind of watching, a kind of attention, a lamp left on in a dark house. So he tore it out, and he resigned that spring, and he never spoke of it again for 33 years, and he lived to 91, which I have come to understand was not luck. He lived a long time because he stopped looking. Every officer in these pages who lived a long, quiet life was one who wrote per standing practice and let it lie, and I could have been one of them. I want to tell you, I stopped there. I had the arrangement. I had the reason behind the arrangement. I had a 60-year pattern documented in 100 photographs on a drive in my safe. I had, by any reasonable standard, solved it. The Park Service wasn't refusing to help. They had been asked 66 years ago by frightened men who loved this land to never again point the attention of their institution at a place that grew toward attention. And they had kept the promise so long and so faithfully that the promise had outlived every person who understood it, until all that remained was a reflex, a silence, a sentence loaded in the mouth. Don't call us about that ridge again. They weren't hanging up on me. They were the last faithful, uncomprehending guards on a wall built to keep something from being looked at, and I was standing in front of that wall with a spotlight, asking why it was there. I understood all of it, and understanding it did not stop me, because I have that flaw, and I went up the ridge one more time. Alone. In daylight, which I told myself was safer, at the exact coordinates Delmar Wells had given for the standing figure. I don't fully know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe. A body, an entrance, the place where the paper goes when it disappears. I stood on the spine of that ridge in the thin, cold sun, and I looked, really looked, the thing every account had warned against, and I felt the whole enormous silence of the wilderness turn very slowly, the way a sleeping animal turns its head, and settle its attention on the small, warm, noticing thing that was me. I left. I have never told anyone what I felt up there, and I'm not going to now. But I put in my retirement papers within the month, and I told everyone it was my knees, and I moved down to Great Falls, and I did not look back at the mountains, if I could help it, and for 3 years I was fine. I was one of the ones who stopped looking. I thought I'd earned it. Then last week, the department, modernizing, sent every retired officer a digitized archive of their old case files, a courtesy, a thumb drive in a padded envelope with a nice letter. I plugged it in out of nothing but nostalgia. My whole career, scanned and dated and sorted, hundreds of cases in neat gray folders. And there was one more file than there should have been. It was dated 11 years from now. The reporting officer field held my name and my old badge number 411. The incident location was the Eastern Ridge, above the Two Medicine survey line. The narrative field was empty except for 2 lines. In the flat, clipped shorthand I have written 10,000 times in my life, unmistakably my own phrasing. A report I have never written about an incident that has not happened, waiting in a folder 11 years ahead of me. Subject located on Ridge, Rangers notified, communication terminated as expected. I have not slept since. I have read Wilson Bullshoe's warning 100 more times. A thing that's watched grows toward the watcher, and I finally understand what my great error was, the one I made standing on that ridge in the sun. It was not that I looked at the ridge. It's that in looking, I let the ridge learn my name, and my hand, and the shape of the reports I write. And now it is writing them itself, ahead of me, drawing me forward toward a night 11 years off when I will drive back up that fire road, because the file says I will, and I will find the subject standing there, waiting for me to leave so it can get on with something. And I will pick up my radio and call the Rangers, and they will go still, and one of them will say the words, and the line will go dead, exactly as it always has. So if you are ever out there, and you make a routine call, and the person on the other end goes quiet for 3 long seconds before they answer, do not ask them why. That silence is not indifference, and it is not a bad connection. It is the last kindness of everyone who came before you, holding a door shut on your behalf. And the only thing worse than not knowing what's behind it is what happens to the ones who make them open it.